This week on Thinking Deeply about Primary Education.
They've got 4 lessons to plan, 5 lessons to plan, and they're able to plan those to a high standard where teachers are able to just adapt those plannings to their class.
You've developed a system that's going to make hopefully teachers more effective, make the pupil experience the best version it could possibly be, and then you're refining it over time. And then you're almost like you are planting your flag, like when you say protect that time.
We're almost 10, 15 years behind that because there are many schools that expect you to create all of your plans from scratch, whereas we don't do that. So we're probably more in line with what some schools in the UK are doing now.
Welcome to Thinking Deeply about Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time-poor but enthusiasm-rich primary teachers. This week, I'm joined by Lewis Sargent and Matthew Lee as we discuss planning and their approach to sharing the load, reducing workload, but also ensuring a high-quality opportunity of learning for all pupils. So Lewis and Matt, it's lovely to have you here today. Thank you very much for joining me.
Good to be here, thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here, Kieran. Thanks so much.
So I'm really looking forward to talking about your system for planning that you've established across your school. But I thought it makes sense to start a bit with a little bit about who you are and how you got here today.
So I am Matthew Lee and I'm the Vice Principal at Wales International School. I've been there now for just over 2 years, going my 3rd year now. And obviously I am in charge of all the academic pastoral systems in the school, as well as a few other things operationally. And what we've done is quite transformative as a system, thanks to the hard work of Lewis. And now we're trying to make sure that goes whole school successfully and succinctly. And prior to that, I was in Jordan for 6 years, which is where I am today. So the internet goes off. I am sorry.
Yeah, I'm Lewis. I have been working in the UAE over the last 7 years. Been at Wales International School now for just over 3 years, and I am the primary head teacher. And yeah, I think as Matthew said earlier, we have tried to make a lot of big changes in the school to try and make sure that the quality of teacher learning is consistent across the school, and that's what we're excited to talk to you about today.
Matt, you joke about your internet, but mine was really playing up this morning. Like some websites weren't open. I was like, oh my goodness, I need this to work. But so far, so good. And touch wood. I think if we start with the fundamentals, what does your planning system look like in practice, week to week, and how is it structured across the school?
So one thing we're doing this year is planning 2 weeks ahead of time. That was a huge debate because you've got some teachers that are always going to say, has to be planned at the last minute so I can adapt my planning. But after reviewing that, we found out those are the teachers that were least likely to do their planning. So it was easier to literally say, okay, as a system, we need to have 2 weeks ahead of time. One staff member plans for a core subject, and then that's adapted over the next 2 weeks by the other staff to deliver in the lessons. So last year we did it was 1 week's notice. So we had the plans delivered and checked, which gave staff about 3 days to adapt the plans for their lessons. So obviously they didn't adapt the plans for their class. Whereas now we're giving them 10 days under the logic of, well, within 10 days, you should be able to adapt it for your class. And we do that theoretically throughout the school, but in secondary, it's more subject specialist planning specific grades. Sometimes they're the only one who teaches that grade. Sometimes it is 2 or 3 people teaching the grade, but it's the same structure of having the plans delivered 2 weeks ahead of time. And then we also share those plans ahead of time with parents. That was also a huge debate as well, whether we should be sharing them before or after we delivered them. But we decided on sharing them beforehand, just because the parents that are most keen, we wanted them to have as much time as possible to pre-learn the vocabulary, which is an issue we have in a very EL-focused school, as opposed to them sharing after the fact. And also it added a bit more in terms of ourselves, holding ourselves accountable for making sure all the plans were ready in a decent form the weekend before, 3 days before we actually start going live. So that's been a journey to get to that point where we can systematically do that across the school, across all core and non-core subjects. But it's where we're at the moment, thanks to the fact that we're we take an annual approach, which I think few schools take these days, but we basically want to take the idea that we want to build every single year on what happened the year before. That's why me and Liz have both been in school multiple years now. And since we started, we had that dream of saying, right, we don't have good planning at the moment. We're not going to have it next year, but we're going to have better planning the year after that. The year after that, we hope to have even better planning. So when we have new teachers in, we don't really let them adapt the planning until they've passed PRD, and then they're really able to say, okay, I want to completely revamp this term's curriculum, the content, what we want to deliver, and the pace we want to deliver it at. And then we discuss whether that's appropriate for that class or whether it's appropriate for the whole year group. And we start to look at it and have those discussions with them.
I just think it's important to start with the why, sort of why we did this. So when we first came into the school, planning wasn't at the level it should be. And when we looked at sort of the makeup of our staff, actually we have teachers that have had training in England in different variations of training, whether that be primary ed, whether that be a PGCE. We have teachers from South Africa, teachers from Ireland. So we had a big mix of different sort of training, and that also comes with a different level of expectations. And different levels of experience as well. So some teachers had experience overseas in the UAE. Some teachers were brand new to the UAE, so they didn't really understand how to adapt it to our context, culture of our school. So that was sort of the reason why we wanted a vehicle that everyone can use, and consistency across the school, consistency across the subjects as well. It was very clear to us that there were some year groups that were planning some very good lessons, and other year groups that weren't. Not that they weren't very good; they just weren't planned in a particular way. So that's sort of the reason why. And then everything that we've done as well has been based on theory. So nothing that we've introduced is just, oh, we think this is good. Go ahead and do it. We're very much believers of starting with the why. This is why we're doing this. This is what we think we should be doing. This is why. Do you agree? Do we disagree? So it's very much based on theory.
And I'd want to say one other thing that makes it slightly more relevant to listeners. I don't know how many international schools you've had on previously, Kieran, but one thing I think is absurd in an international context is you can think people will get off a plane and then be teaching an entire new community of completely new context of students to those they've never met before less than a week later, and have set up their classroom, set up their house, set up their family, set up their cats, found the shops. It's a completely different world, and we expect people to be able to literally, some schools literally 24 hours later, be teaching a class with decent enough planning. That is impossible. So I think the more schools can do in terms of preparing planning ahead of time for their staff internationally, it just means you don't have to worry for the first few weeks of teaching until they're ready to pick it up. So one thing we always insist upon at the end of every single term, we try and get even further ahead than that 2 weeks, because we know that staff coming in are going to be at their worst at the start, not their best. And that's not just in our school, that's across every international school. And it's something that's not talked about, is the experience of the culture shock and moving across cultures, and the jet lag, etc. But also the worry, and then having to plan on top of that for kids you've never met is much more difficult than it is in a school in England, where there's some similarities most likely, or you'll have been to the school, might even been to the country, hopefully, if you're already in England. Whereas we generally have people that get off a plane and start teaching a few hours later.
I think that's really, really important, I think. And because, I think there are parallels with your least experienced teachers, your ECTs, when they first come out of university. They need that scaffold, they need that support. And it sounds like you guys have put a system in place that allows you to draw on the expertise of your teachers. So you've got this key person doing the sort of the main plan, but not having to focus on so many different subjects at once. And then teachers have time to refine that. And I think that brings together lots of great thinking about how we can be like both economical, but really, really proficient with our planning. Because, I always read studies that say, of every half hour that a teacher spends planning, 20 minutes are spent looking for resources online. And you guys are moving away from that because you're having, okay, who's got the most expertise? Who's going to think through this really deeply? And let's put that stuff in place.
If you're listening to this conversation and thinking about how to make mathematics richer,
clearer, and more coherent for every child, then let me take a moment to tell you about something that's transforming classrooms around the world. The story of mathematics is not just another scheme. It's a complete, research-driven curriculum that reduces teacher workload, strengthens mathematical understanding, and gives schools a coherent journey from early counting through to pre-algebra and beyond. Every small step is intentional. Every representation has a purpose. Every episode is crafted so teachers know why they're teaching something, how to teach it, and what to look for as students develop real proficiency. Schools using the story of mathematics tell us the same thing. Lessons feel calmer, more focused, explanations feel sharper, and children make connections that previously took months to secure. Because the sequence isn't a patchwork of disjointed ideas, it's a narrative. Concepts are introduced exactly when they're needed, supported by manipulatives, worked examples, intelligent practice, and routines for reasoning and proof. And the best part of this is that teachers feel supported. They have the tools to be the most effective versions of themselves. Now, if your school is looking for a curriculum that actually reduces workload, increases confidence, and raises attainment, then now is the perfect time to take a look. Visit alta-education.com and book a conversation with the team, and you'll see very quickly why so many schools are making the switch. Now, back to the episode. From your perspective, what sort of concrete benefits have you seen so far, both in terms of teacher workload, development, and even perhaps for student learning? Have you seen anything over the last 2 years then, guys?
So what we've made sure we've done is that we have dedicated planning time within the timetable. Now, we're extremely lucky to be able to timetable that within our school day. I know that in the UK it's impossible to do that near enough. But yeah, so we have dedicated planning time. So each teacher is able to explain what's coming up over the next couple of weeks. Here are the ideas, here's sort of the planning, and they're able to share ideas there with the phase leader and the subject leaders that are often in those meetings as well, to be able to build on ideas. And that stops sort of I'm stuck, I don't really know what to do. That sort of stops the trolling through the internet, finding something off Twinkle and copying and pasting that over and not really understanding why you're teaching something a certain way. So I think that's been a big part of our strategy, and it helps with it helps obviously with professional growth, but also with their teachers' well-being. They've got 4 lessons to plan, 5 lessons to plan, and they're able to plan those to a high standard where teachers are able to just adapt those plannings to their class. And we've also introduced this year professional learning communities. I don't know, Matthew, you want to talk more about our PLC groups?
Talk about PLC. The first one I say something about UK, Kieran, just in case. I don't know if you have staff from. One of the phenomena we face is some of our staff get off the plane and they say, "Where is the planning?" And what they mean by that is, where is a year's worth of plans that I can teach off the shelf? And I think that's what I call an academy mindset, where they come from certain academy chains that provide all the plans to them. I think very few international schools do that. That's one of the biggest cultural changes they face, teachers leaving England, is this idea that planning don't work that way internationally. We're almost 10, 15 years behind that because there are many schools that expect you to create all of your plans from scratch, whereas we don't do that. So we're probably more in line with what some schools in the UK are doing now. And then what our PLCs are, what we wanted to do, building what the collaborative planning time that Lewis is talking about there, where every grade meets up just to literally talk about their planning collaboratively each week. We also have that across the school every 3 weeks. So every 3 weeks, we have all of the science planners in primary and the subject specialists in secondary, because we're through school. We have the science, the maths, the English, the everybody else groups that meet up as PLCs. Now, PLCs is a very vapid term, I'm going to say, because I had to help write a book on PLCs. And when I was reading the research over summer on it, it just seemed like a lot of people had a lot of different ideas of what a PLC could mean. And I'm going to take it as the term aura farming. Like Lewis said that last week, 'cause he's younger than me, like quite a while. He goes, we need to do it's this term called aura farming. And I thought I knew what it meant, because I know what the term aura meant, because I learned that last week, and it means like reputation. I thought aura farming must be, you're doing something to grow reputation. I don't know. But anyway, I found out what it did mean. It's going to be completely different to what I was saying. And that's what PLCs is as well. When you actually find out what it means, which is basically whatever you want it to mean, you realize that what you've experienced probably before is not a PLC, because you can have a PLC that's online with just a few people talking about things, sharing resources, where it's research based, where it's once a month on a book club. Those are all forms of PLC. So I think it's very important we define what we mean by it, because I think what we do is very practical for any school. And to define what we do, I'm going to say what we don't do, because I was in a school that had a PLC that was when 3 staff members from across the school, this is where the whole school idea came from, actually met up every month to discuss a research project they had to do together. And it was awful. And they didn't get anything out of it. And no doubt the person who came up with that is still saying it was amazing and going around the world saying it's amazing, but it didn't work. And the reason it didn't work is fundamentally no one had the time to do it properly, and the research was very light touch, in all fairness. Whereas what we do is we have our whole school subject groups. One person will present on an idea. So at the start, we decided on 12 ideas that they wanted to present on as individuals throughout, or groups. And then they'll present on that to the others in a relatively interactive and fun way, because it's typically Wednesday after school, so it's got to be relatively engaging. And then based on that, they'll then go and do a peer observation between then and the next one, 3 weeks later, of somebody else in the group. It's always someone different. We have a whole school timetable that means that our secondary can observe primary and vice versa, because we're trying to break down that divide. Because if you've got a really wicked science planner in primary, you want them to have as much interaction with your science planning in secondary if it ain't as strong, and vice versa. I'm saying science because I lead the science groups by having no scientific awareness. And that's another thing we want out of PLCs, is that it's not driven by the SLT, it's driven by the actual members themselves. Hence, each one takes ownership on a different week to lead it, and then to schedule the peer observations, and then to make sure they conduct. And at the start of the next PLC happens with discussing the peer observations with the person you observed into the next research-informed presentation. Some of them are more research-informed than others, depending on who's presenting. We gave an idea, an example the first time of what we thought would be a good standard. But some people, when they did play-based, it was really cool in my group because it was play-based science. And then we've had interactive experimental stuff. But we also had exam preparation because, my grade 1 science planner probably doesn't know much about the GCSE science prep, but there is stuff that they can learn from it and vice versa. I think it's a lot that A-levels people can learn from play-based stuff. So those are our PLC planning communities, but then from that meant that they could then adapt their planning across the school in order to make sure it's more linear as the experience of the students. So that therefore, if they're going from 5 to 6, they're going from grade 1 all the way up to grade 10. They're going to have a reasonably similar experience because the skill sets are being shared. Because I think there's too many times there's that silo pockets within school where you have great practice for exam preparation amongst your GCSE teachers who are normally become more and more GCSE specialists and don't touch key stage 3, you then have a bit more of an engaging, interactive approach, very focused on parental engagement, etc. Then you go down, you have really good EL practice amongst lower community primary schools, with you've got the whole phonics and stuff. And why isn't that going up through the school? So building on the fact that the belief that everyone can learn from each other, that's what hinges our planning together, and that's what it's allowed to be, because now we have our A-level and sixth form teachers that know the KG teachers just as well as they might know their Key Stage 3 colleagues. And ultimately, that's where it's leading, is this whole school approach to subject instruction. And we anchored it around subjects, although I guess you could do like an opt-in model where people could opt into different areas of practice they want to develop in sort of carousel-based approach. I've seen that before. Works absolutely fine. But we wanted to do it across the whole year. And we wanted to also build into next year and potentially the year after, so that they can continue building these professional learning communities within subject-based across years. And the feedback's been pretty more positive than I expected, to be honest.
For me, it all stemmed from last year when we sort of did cross peer observations across school. So secondary came down to primary one day and observed what was going on in primary, and then vice versa. They literally came in for 5-10 minutes and they wrote their feedback. It was very, very brief. It just had to. We gave them 3 or 4 bits of criteria to look at, and it was really, really beneficial for all of our staff. Some of our staff, especially in secondary, were very surprised and couldn't believe sort of the things that were going on in primary, which was really, really nice to hear. And it's good to hear for the staff as well, because obviously as a primary sort of head teacher, I'm just focusing on primary, and you as I've I was said to Matthew before, you just focus on the things that you want to do better next time. You want to do better. Okay, I need to improve this. Okay, next time I need to do this. Yes, that's good, but we can do better in this area. And actually, it was a nice to just take a step back and go, okay, what we're doing is working really well, and people can learn from that. So yeah, so it all stemmed from those rounds of peer observations. Is why we've been doing this, and like Matthew said, I went to a session on the use of floor books in KG, in reception in year one, and it was really interesting to see how the secondary English team were able to go, okay, I can use this, I can adapt it for this, or I can. Our children have all got laptops, so they can work on Google Docs together. How can we evidence this learning? And it was more it was a lot more collaborative than I was expecting it to be. I was expecting it to be, here's someone talking for 10 minutes. This is sort of what I've researched. This is what we think's good. Off you go. Actually, it was more of a collaborative process, and I'm looking forward to it for the rest of the year as well.
This is what really drew me to this approach, and it's that coherent journey for all students. Because that's what we want. We want every student to have the same high quality experience the whole way through, no matter who their teacher is in the school, and that relationship across phases. Because I often talk about maths, how I think stages and phases are unhelpful distinctions because you've got this one journey that goes the whole way through basically your life, and I think that's true in most subjects, if not all. And so the fact that you guys have created this system and you're constantly reflecting on the impact of that system, you know, I think both the teachers and the pupils get the very best possible journey. Because I'm pretty sure Dylan William talks about how it's not the difference between schools in an area; it's the difference between classrooms that makes there's the biggest difference. And so when you're focusing on that consistency of experience, I think you're definitely speaking my language. And whenever you guys mentioned this to me when I first started, I thought this sounds absolutely fantastic. If you've ever finished an episode of Thinking Deeply about primary education and wanted to go further, to read more, think more, and connect ideas, hey, what you reading for is exactly where you should start. Each week, we curate the best thinking from across education, books that challenge assumptions, research that informs practice, and podcasts that broaden perspectives. From curriculum and pedagogy to sound leadership and international insights, it's your weekly companion for meaningful professional growth. And because we know teachers are time poor but enthusiasm rich, it's concise, evidence informed, and genuinely useful. Subscribe for free at thinkingdeeply.info. If we think about reflection, what have been the biggest challenges or perhaps even some unintended consequences of moving to this system? And how have you tried to mitigate them, perhaps even just across year 1 and 2?
All right, so there's been a few. As you might expect, individual creativity has not flourished under our current approach. But what I will say is we do allow individuals who've demonstrated a particular skill in planning to really take the lead and to go with it. So that's was an issue we had in the first year, that through bringing the collaborative planning meetings, we've been able to adapt that or improve on that. Another issue we've been having is it's basically you can get some very weak teachers, I think, maybe it's just internationally, but I'd probably say everywhere, in terms of their delivery and their understanding. And it's that understanding of what someone else provides you a plan, and you have to deliver from that plan. You have to understand what they mean. And no matter how many times they tell you and show you, you still might not know or might not want to know. So I did a PRD observation of somebody who was teaching the same plan that I had just seen in another class, and they were 45 minutes behind the other person in a 45-minute lesson. So they'd only got the first minute through the plan of a PRD. Now, is that an individual issue or is that a plan? And I like to think that is a problem, but if they were planning their own lessons, it would still be a problem. So we've just passed the problem. And if anything, we've got a system that allows them to hopefully improve upon it. An issue we do face, again, is the entire curriculum change. So we've moved to the modular GCSEs, which then meant we've had to resequence our entire GCSEs around that, the increased exams. But within that, we have to then resequence all of the year 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4 science as well, which is a challenge. And it's an unexpected challenge. And then our way of planning basically means if we have a very strong planner 1 year in grade 3, we will typically try to move that person up to grade 4 to improve the planning there. So staff might well be allocated year groups where we need to improve the planning. So some staff's experience is actually going to be, I've improved the planning loads. I want to reap the benefits of my year in this grade, and actually we're saying no, for the school's benefit, we need you to go to this other grade to improve their planning next. So some of our staff have the constant experience of just improving things, and other staff who are probably weaker at planning have the experience constantly of collaborating on other people's plans because they're not necessarily got the skill set yet to develop their own plans because other people rely upon them. So ultimately we rely more upon the strongest staff members in terms of planning, which is very equitable, but some people would probably say that it is unfair. And that is the downside. And also, and I will say this, is some grades have 7 teachers in, and their experience is very different to the grades that have 3 teachers in. So whenever you're doing a shared planning model, that is a huge discrepancy because in the 6 teachers, they will literally have 2 teachers planning 4 math lessons, planning 2 lessons each, which you want to kind of hope that they're very good by that point if you're only trying 2 lessons a week. But no, I have teachers that complain about the 4 lessons and still complain about the 2 lessons. So that does happen a lot. So those are some of the issues we've faced, and then it's inculcating staff into the model each year and them understanding that, okay, this is how we plan. And we have a very simplistic shared planning structure, honestly. It's got hinge questioning. It's got the sort of the I do, we do, you do approaches in it. It's got do now activities, but that's about it. And then the tasks, we use scaffolding within the tasks to make sure that we're trying for great level of challenge. But that's it. But even that I consider very basic planning pedagogy requires quite a lot of training for the new staff at the start if they come from different cultures, depending on where they come from. And we haven't quite had the phenomena where we have staff with significantly higher standards than that because we consider those aspects best practice presently. But we did have a strange one where someone from the government came in to do an inspection. They wanted much more of a project-based learning approach, which isn't within our planning pedagogy necessarily. So we've now had to bring in a subject that is basically a problem-based learning subject, which is a bit strange, I know, just because that's something that the feedback from the government they wanted to see from us.
First year of doing this, teachers, there was some reluctance of the sort of the big change that was happening in terms of the quality of teaching and learning, in terms of the first year of like Matthew said, having our very simple structure of lesson planning with the do now activity, with the learning objective, etc., etc. I do, we do, you do. A hinge question, and then whatever it's called, the end question. Sorry, the plenary.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm working on 3 hours sleep. All right, leave me be. So that meant that actually in our first year, lots of the plans needed to be changed. Lots of the way that so people that have been there for 3 or 4 years, and we were saying actually this isn't what we want in the school anymore. This is the way we're going. So we did find that sort of reluctance from certain teachers, certain members of staff, including middle leaders as well. So then it was a case of right, just jump on. If you want to jump on our journey with us, jump on our journey with us. If not, then that's fine. So we did have a big change of staff as well in our first year. And then as an international school, we sort of work on 2-year contracts, and our end of our 2 years up for our cohort of staff now is at the end of this year. So I'm already foreseeing a big change happening, or a big sort of challenge to come in the future, where we have a lot of our staff possibly leaving the school to go to other schools and to go back home, whatever, and that's absolutely fine. But it's bringing the new staff in and sort of training them up again ready for this 2-year cycle. So that's sort of the challenges that we've had or will face in the future as well.
Yeah, I mean that must be really tough when the inspectors come in and you're being evidence informed and evidence guided, whatever the sort of the parlance of the day might be, and then you're being asked to do something which almost runs slightly contrary to that. Although I suppose the expertise reversal effect would allow for it in some instances. But I think Matt, your point about the planning skill set really, really important. I should not have been let anywhere near the planning in my first year of teaching because, I moved from the programs of study in the north of Ireland to the English national curriculum and the national strategies as it was over here, and I'd never seen them before. And all of a sudden, I was responsible for that next 12 weeks of learning, and what I would have done to have someone more expert, supporting me in that planning. It would have been huge. And so I think in terms of the challenges and the unintended consequences, are you guys happy for listeners who are interested in almost moving towards this kind of model or learning more to reach out and contact you? Would that be something I can facilitate through the show notes and
That'd
stuff?
be awesome, particularly if they're in international schools, because what we never hear about much is the problems or challenges other international schools face. But I've just done a school inspection recently, and they had a huge changeover of staff recently, at the end of last year, and that's what happens in our sector. It's somewhat unique about our sector, the lack of stability. And so me and Lewis talk about a lot in terms of what happens when the leadership change. How do we ensure this vision maintains itself? And we'd love to hear from people in other schools that have faced challenges and what they did about it. Because I mean, I was in one international school which hadn't really changed in about 40, 50 years because it didn't allow the systems to change. It basically said, no, we're going to do it this way. And when people join us, they adapt to our system. And that's kind of what we're trying to build now, but in a school that's 9 years old, not 60 years old. So it'd be fascinating to hear of other people's experiences, certainly, and the sort of challenges they faced with planning.
Absolutely. And I think it can often seem like we're working in silos when really we don't need to. So hopefully people will get in touch. I suppose, Lewis, I should have said, A, congratulations at the start of the episode, and B, give a caveat that you've got a 3-week-old and are running on what probably described as fumes at this point.
Thanks, Kieran. Yeah, yeah, three week old, and he's been doing absolutely fine. But it's my 20-month old. She's the one that's been keeping me up all night. So, yeah, I'm basically running off 2, 3 hours sleep every day, pretty much.
I mean, that's a wise move, getting the tiredness out of the way. That was always my plan. My boys have got like 2 years between them, and I'm not going back to that level of tiredness ever again. If you're trying to keep up with artificial intelligence without losing your Sundays, subscribe to Teacher Prompts by Neil Almond. It's a weekly AI briefing for teachers, a quick scan of what matters, classroom ready prompt to try, and plain English explainers of the latest features. It's free, written with teachers in mind. Sign up at news.teacherprompts.ai. Looking ahead, what refinements are you going to make to the system for year 3? So I'm sure once we get back from the winter break, attention will automatically turn to 26, 27 at some point. Are there any refinements you're going to make? And what advice would you offer to other leadership teams who are considering a similar approach?
So I know one of the core refinements we're going to make is we're very externally driven in terms of our assessments in the UAE. We have the GL progress test at the end of each year, and they are a huge part of how we're judged as a school. And because of that annual assessment, effectively, we need to adapt all of our plans to be more driven by the sort of benchmark that sets, relying upon the fact that that is an age-expected external accountability measure. So what we're doing now is we're really breaking down every single individual progress test at every level, so then we can remap our planning and curriculum maps solidly against those without presuming that they do so, and then working on how we relate to parents in order to meet that accountability measure. Because I think what students do in school is vital. What they do at home is more vital. And internationally, different cultures have different approaches to working at home, and certainly the one we work in, it's not as normalized as it might be in other cultures. So what we want to do is embrace more of a structure of how we in school promote the idea of working at home that is a continuation. And I know home can be quite controversial in terms of the research. That research is done in America and England, where people are typically first language speakers or surrounded by English every day. We are not that. And therefore, what we want to do is work on the solutions. And one part of the solution is how we can build up a culture of revision and work, which sustains our students throughout their GCSE adventure when they get to that part after they finish primary. So those are the things we're going to be looking at predominantly, is the homeschool partnerships and the external accountability. Then also, as Lewis was saying, we are experiencing a huge transition amongst our staff going into next year. And what we're likely to do in anticipation of that is harden our systems even more, work on file storage, because you can't presume. One issue we've had is staff coming from Microsoft schools, and we are a Google school. How we work on our training and induction programs to ensure they get the skill set ahead of time to adapt to us, rather than presuming we're going to adapt to them. I think internationally, we've recognized that people from the American curriculum have the biggest journey to make in terms of changing, adapting to our expectations. And therefore, that will affect our hiring policy as well, because we know that staff hired from British-based background are more likely to be able to adapt to our planning skill sets. And also, and it sounds a bit brutal, but looking at people's planning ahead of time before they, as part of the interview process, that's something we'll be looking to do, as that becomes our focus, so that we can therefore see, can this person have the bare plans, and do they understand it? Because like we had a person last year that had plans for their last school, whacked them out. They're very useful at the time because we didn't have much in that particular grade 6, 7 maths. But now we're kind of living with the legacy of it not being following our structures as well as it should do if it was all curated. So that's one thing. There's some of the things we're going to do, as well as mapping where our areas of strength are and weaknesses in terms of the planning across the school, which is what we always do. And then the staff that are retaining, where we can move them to match their skill sets. If we've got a strong science planner and we've got a weak grade for science planning, we're likely to ask them to move. Just like we asked our head of maths to move to grade 5 this year from KG2, because the maths plan is already great in KG2. And we thought she could lead with more authenticity and help with transition and help the secondary school more if she was in the grade 5, which I think has been real successful.
Possibly looking at our lesson structure and seeing whether we can add anything more specific to each subject. So possibly, like for example, within the maths, making sure that there is always worked examples in the maths, or thinking of something that we can do for science and English as well. But in terms of advice for other schools, start with why you're doing it, and go down the evidence base. Give and some of the teachers will care. Some of the teachers typically they're not that bothered, and that's absolutely fine. But if you're giving them a why, then they can't sort of rebel against that. We're happy to have professional discussions as well, which is what I really like about working at our school. Is that myself, Matthew, and our principal Joanna, and our new head of secondary, Mr. Ferd. We're very, very open and very honest with each other. And if we see something that we like, we will sort of talk about it. And if we don't agree, we will explain why as well. And it's a safe place to talk about stuff like that.
I want to jump in on that as well, if possible, because I recently did an HMO inspection, and that was part of the feedback I gave. Was there was an assistant head teacher responsible for teaching and learning, and the reality is teaching and learning is a school. I mean, there's lots of other things schools do, fantastic, but teaching and learning matters. And if you believe it matters, it needs to be everyone in the school, particularly the SLT. So that's what I love about our school, is how me and Lewis are constantly in sync, because we're constantly questioning what is best practice in our context. What can we adapt? How does it adapt? And we do that typically the year before. We never adapt things within the year unless it's something going horribly wrong, which hasn't happened yet. But we have that annual approach. So we'll have a meeting in April with the staff to show them how we're going to thinking about adapting any of the systems like planning for the next year, to get their feedback on it. And it can be a very long meeting. And then we spend the next few months working with them if necessary to ensure that all the returning staff are aligned with our vision for teaching and learning. But we make sure we're aligned with it first, because I think teaching and learning is vital, and it has to have huge SLT buy-in. And that's something that we ensure, really.
If you can, protect planning time, collaborative planning time. We're lucky enough, like I said, to be able to have it within our timetable scheduled, so all of grade 1 are off at the same time. So they're able to collaboratively plan and share ideas, and it's worked wonders in our school. And I know it's not doable in schools in the UK. I fully understand that. So don't come at me, people in the comments. But yeah, in international schools, it's definitely doable. To have that planning time has big impact on staff wellbeing, but also the teaching and learning of our school as well.
Yeah, it's great planning time. Our staff do operate on a 70% timetable load. Typically, it can go between 60 and 70% as an overall timetable. And I know the UK operates more of a 90% model, so our staff are 30% less than the UK on average. So when we say planning time, we mean the collaborative planning meetings that we have once per week on top of the typical 6 or 7 frees dedicated for planning and marking. Minimum, I'd say probably more than that though, if we were actually looking at, so we operate at 60, 70% load.
Don't worry, Lewis. The comment section on these are they're always really nice and really positive. We haven't yet got to the point where we've got vitriolic bile coming in at I'm not sure I can handle that. But I think, like, as I'm listening, right, what's really sort of clear to me is you've got all these competing different elements and challenges within system, and whatever system you're in, you will have that sort of outside noise, that those things competing for our attention as leaders. And what you've done is you've developed a system that's going to make hopefully teachers more effective, make the pupil experience more enriched or sort of the best version it could possibly be, and then you're refining it over time, and then you're almost like you are planting your flag, like when you say protect that time. There will be ways to protect time, whether you're working in the United States or you're working in England, even Wales and Scotland will have different expectations, because I was speaking to some teachers from Northern Ireland last week, and they were saying about how the planning expectations on them, even though they're in almost like almost a very similar situation in England, couldn't be more different, in terms of I'm sure there's still schools in the UK who or in England who are putting their plans in to be checked and things like that, but that's not necessarily as normal as it was maybe 10, 15 years ago. So I think anyone listening will be thinking about, okay, the sort of like the top level messages are really, really clear here, and then anyone who's in the same situation, actually, well, here's a model we can learn from, and here are 2 school leaders we can learn from, and probably include Joanna in it too. I'm sure she's always really generous with her time and her expertise, so if anyone's thinking specifically, well, let's get in touch with Lewis, get in touch with Matt. But if they're thinking bigger picture, how do I make something like this work in my context? I think they've also got that message too. So I mean that's been really clear. It's been fascinating to talk to you guys about this. Massively impressed, Lewis, that you managed to keep it together. On such little sleep. I know I would be nowhere near as coherent and cognizant as yourself.
Thank you.
No, my flower. And hopefully this is the first of many discussions with you guys. So all I have to do is say thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Kieran. Really appreciate it.
And to everyone at home, until next time, thanks for listening.